Oh, Seekers of the Storm has finally dropped. That's awesome. I've been wanting to do a video on this game for ages, but knowing this DLC was coming, I figured I'd just wait for it to drop. So let's boot it up and...
2 hours later.
What's wrong?
The aspect items are far.
Risk of Rain 2 released back in March of 2019. A sequel to the stellar but often overlooked original Risk of Rain, which had dropped way back in 2013, which itself actually got a remake only a couple of years back. Now for context, me and my friends picked up the original Risk of Rain in 2014 and had a really great time with it. Once we got our head around its, punishing difficulty curve, of course. Amassing about 40 hours or so of playtime before moving on to other things. Then, like a bolt from the blue, we caught wind of the game's sequel dropping. And initially I was, a little skeptical. Risk of Rain 1 had a very unique and distinct pixel style, and the choice of moving to 3D with Risk of Rain 2 had me a little surprised. The models all looking, kinda simple. But all of my fears were instantly dispersed after booting up the game and getting stuck into it. And with over 300 hours in this game, almost 400 hours now, I can tell you, if you're just here for a rating, this game is a must-own, and will have you hooked on its roguelite gameplay for hundreds of hours. But if you want a little more of an in-depth look, stick around. Developed by Hopoo Games, Risk of Rain 2 is a roguelike... What is it? Roguelite?
Both is good.
Third-person shooter cross-bullet hell game, which has you progressing through a series of stages as quickly as you can. Each stage is scattered with chests, drones, turrets, shrines, containers, and a teleporter that you can take to move on to the next level. Oh, and did I mention enemies? Yeah, lots and lots and lots of enemies. Risk of Rain's gameplay cycle boils down to a pretty simple concept. Defeat enemies for gold, then use said gold to unlock chests, which give you items to make you stronger to defeat enemies. However, from the minute you start your run, you'll notice a timer at the top of your screen. The longer you take in your run, the stronger the enemies become. And this isn't reset between stages either. So there's kind of a balance between, okay, I want to get as many strong items as possible, while also not taking so long on a level that you get immediately dumpstered upon teleporting into the next stage. Which, when you're first starting out, is bound to happen. The game has multiple difficulties. Drizzle being the easiest, of course. Rainstorm, the game's standard difficulty. And Monsoon, the game's toughest difficulty. How these difficulties impact your game is twofold. They impact the time between the difficulty scale-ups in-game, and they impact your stats, things like your armor, regeneration, damage, etc. If you're playing Drizzle, for example, it'll take you about 10 minutes for the difficulty to bump up from easy to normal. While if you're playing on Rainstorm, it'll only take you 5 minutes to bump from easy to normal. And on Monsoon, even less. Each time you move up a notch on the difficulty indicator, monsters gain an additional 30% health and 20% damage. And on higher notches, we'll even have stronger enemy variants such as elites and mini-bosses spawn. At least enemies drop more money though, so, that's a plus, right? Well, kind of. As you progress through the stages, chests, drones, turrets, and shrines will progressively cost you more to activate, though the costs are fixed from when you arrive at the stage. There is also kind of a cap to how difficult the game becomes. When you reach this difficulty, You know, when the game is actively laughing at you, you're pretty much at the game's most extreme, in which enemies can essentially atomize you with a stiff fart. But if you've reached this difficulty, then you're probably already pretty stacked yourself. Or you're about to get murdered. You know, either way. Risk of Rain has a pretty crazy amount of playable characters to choose from. Initially, you start the game with just the Commando, a decent all-arounder who will help you get adjusted to the game. But after playing, you'll quickly unlock a bevy of other characters. The Huntress, Mercenary, Mul-T, Engineer, Acrid, Artificer, Loader, Rex, Captain, Bandit, Railgunner, Void Fiend, and a kind of secret character in the Heretic. And with Seekers of the Storm dropping, we have 3 newcomers in the Seeker, Chef, who's returning from Risk of Rain 1, and the False Sun. There's a lot to talk about for Seekers of the Storm, so let's just put a pin in these guys for now. Each character has 4 abilities, a couple of unlockable ability variants, and a couple of skins to keep things interesting. All except the Heretic, because you can only actually play as them if you manage to get all of their abilities through the blue item drops, and are never permanently unlocked or selectable from the start of the game. I do kind of wish they were just a permanent unlockable character like the others, as you'll often be too far in a run by the time you start to get a lot of blue items to really want to consider changing how your character plays entirely. My favorite characters to play as have always been the Engineer, the Captain, and Mul-T. But honestly, none of these characters are boring, and play pretty uniquely from one another. And that's to say nothing of all the insane modded characters that have been added by the community. And what amazing game wouldn't be complete without an absolute banger of a soundtrack? Chris Chrisodoulou is the absolute god behind Risk of Rain's somber, moody atmosphere, and his influence in this game should not, nay, cannot be overstated. Each of these tracks incite this eerie sense of loneliness in the face of an expanding, unknown planet. We play this game as the survivors of the UES Safe Travels, enduring this hostile alien planet in hopes of escaping with any other members of the expedition we meet along the way. And Chris's music personifies that excellently, with these spiritual guitar chords amidst a cosmic soundscape. I think the game words it best with the phrase, "And his music was electric." I know I go on about video game soundtracks in, well, every video I do basically, but that's because of how much music can convey to us in ways that words and, hell, even visuals cannot. So many of these songs, like The Rain formerly known as Purple and Con l'etude poderoso, give me goosebumps just listening to them. Like, you know how you have music you'll listen to for those games that hype you up? Or music you'll listen to feel good? Well, Risk of Rain's music makes me feel sad, but in the happiest way. I get that's kind of an oxymoron, and if you've not heard these songs before, you probably won't get what I'm talking about. But I know there are at least a couple of you out there who do, who definitely get where I'm coming from. If you're at all interested, Chris did a full album commentary of Risk of Rain 2's soundtrack on his YouTube channel, and I would highly recommend you give it a listen. Now, I could go on and on and on and on about the music in this game, but I do want to steer things back to the gameplay itself. Because Risk of Rain 2 has the most dopamine-pumping gameplay I think I've ever experienced. It was you. You'll start out any run scrounging together items to empower yourself. You'll hit momentum, teleporter after teleporter, eventually becoming this screen-clearing deity. Though some runs you're of course just going to take a rough dirt nap after some giant claps you, or some chain gunner pumps you full of lead. Or this big Godzilla-looking motherfucker will scorch the meat off your bones. Or a billion of these nasty little goddamn wisps are gonna hit scan you into an MLG. But, eventually, you're going to get one of those runs where the RNG gods smile upon you and bestow you with one of the many run-changing red items that'll put you on the path of unrivaled apex predator. And boy, is that one of the best feelings you can ever experience in a video game. These are the kind of runs that'll have you going, oh shit, has that almost been 2 hours? And if you get that hit, congratulations, my friend. You're now addicted to this video game crack. The AA meetings are Wednesdays and Fridays. And on that note, I should probably take a minute to explain the item rarities, as I've mentioned a few of them already in this video, but well, for the uninitiated, it's probably a little confusing. In Risk of Rain, there are 7 types of rarities of items. You've got your white items, which are your standard common drops, and will usually make up the bulk of your build. Things like the soldier's syringe, crowbar, and lensmaker's glasses. They'll appear most often when you open up smaller chests. Next are the green items, or the uncommon drops, usually bestowing more powerful, albeit more niche uses. Things like the sail star, the ukulele, and the leeching seed. These items will rarely appear in small chests, but most often appear in larger chests, as well as rewards for completing a boss's teleporter event. These are usually more the icing on the cake type items, like adding lifesteal to your critical hits, or adding a chain lightning effect on every chance on hit. This is also where a lot of great utility items are found, and will often help you enhance your build. Then we have the red or rare chests. Like the name would imply, these can be found in larger chests, the rare gold chests that can spawn on the 4th level you reach in a run, and if you're lucky, from things like chance shrines. Red items are usually absolutely busted. Things like the 57-leaf clover, ceremonial dagger, and Dio's best friend. Red items are usually enough to give you a massive boost in power or survivability, but understandably are quite rare to stumble across. If you reach the Hidden Realm, the Bazaar Between Time, you can find red items available here if you're willing to trade 5 green items for 1 red. A pretty expensive cost, but depending on the item, could be well worth it for your character or run. You know, unless it's something like the Waco Vultures or something. Then we have the yellow or boss items. These items are tied specifically to a corresponding boss, and are kinda like the middle point between a red item and a green. Most aren't quite as insanely impactful as red items, but are usually stronger than most green items. This includes items like the Shatter Spleen, Queen's Gland, and the Charged Perforator. These items can be kinda rarer than even red items at times, due to them never dropping from chests or being available in the bazaar. Rather, they can appear at the end of teleporter events from certain bosses. For example, beating a Stone Titan as the teleporter boss could yield you a random green item, or a Titanic Gnarl. You can also rarely find yellow item printers within a stage, but they'll cost you a yellow item from your inventory to use, which could mean you can't even use the printer even if you wanted to. The next item type are the blue or lunar items, which will only drop from opening lunar pods within a stage, or again, purchasing them in the bazaar with lunar coins, a resource that drops randomly from enemies and persists between runs. Lunar items are interesting, usually offering a massive buff to something in exchange for making something else far worse, like the Shaped Glass, Purity, or Corpse Bloom. There was a time when one of these items in particular, the Shaped Glass, absolutely ruled the roost due to the game's innate anti-one-shot mechanic. You see, the item halves your maximum health, but doubles your damage. Kinda risky, right? Well, not when the game has a passive buff that protects you from dying in one hit. So there was a time you could stack like 10 of these things, and as long as you had like just a little bit of lifesteal, you were practically unkillable. That is until the devs cottoned onto it and went, if you take the shaped glass, you're just gonna lose that one hit protection. At the time being kind of a controversial decision, but I think most would agree nowadays it was kind of the right call. Blue items can kind of feel like a bit of a trap at times, because often you'll see one and go, ooh, I wonder what this does, only for you to pick it up and go, oh shit. I'd say always pick up the first one, if only for the logbook entry, and so you know what it does. Then you can see that Transcendence pop up in a future run, and just shake your head knowingly, like, no. Up next are the orange items, or the use items. While most items in Risk of Rain are fairly passive or reactive, activating when you attack or take damage, orange items are more like items you can activate when you need them, before they go on a cooldown. These include items like the Trophy Hunter's Tricorn, Gubo Jr., and the Royal Capacitor. Use items are pretty damn impactful, sometimes used to nuke a boss or threatening elites, others to save your skin with a well-timed heal or mobility. The only thing to keep in mind with use items, however, is that you can only have one of these at a time. Unless you're Mul-T. Mul-T can have two. They can also have pretty substantial cooldowns, but these can be lessened by some green and red items. And finally, we have the purple or void items, the newest item type that was added in the game's first DLC. These items are interesting because taking one will essentially corrupt all its white item counterparts, changing how that item works and corrupting any future items you collect of that type. For example, the Lensmaker's Glasses gives you a 10% critical strike chance, increasing by 10% per item. However, if you collect the Lost Seer's Lens, it will replace all of your current and future Lensmaker's Glasses, no longer granting you that critical chance, but instead, all of your attacks will have a 0.5% chance per item to instantly kill a non-boss enemy. On some characters, this can feel like a massive mistake to take, but for characters with massive fire rate, these new shades can be a massive boon and easy way to obliterate essentially every enemy in the game that isn't a boss. Most purple items are never a must-take for every character. An engineer, for example, accidentally collecting a weeping fungus is going to be in for a pretty miserable run from that point on, while Loader will happily take that trade. I love the concept of the corrupted items and really wish with this most recent DLC we would have seen a new batch of them added to the game. Sadly, we didn't get any additional corrupted items with Survivors of the Storm, so here's hoping for them in the next update. Speaking of DLCs, since the game's initial release, we've had 2 DLCs drop. All the other content the game's given us has all just been free updates prior to Survivors of the Void. And the most recent DLC that dropped on the 27th of August, Seekers of the Storm, was an update that I and the community were all very excited to play. Hell, like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to make this video specifically so I could include all the new content Seekers of the Storm was bringing. I was waiting for this DLC to drop before I could talk about this game. And now that it's finally here, I kind of regret just not making this video like a year ago. Now, I need to stress that while Seekers of the Storm dropped with a lot of bugs and issues, and I mean like a lot of issues, a lot of console players couldn't even play the game when this update dropped. the developers have since dropped 2 patches to fix the myriad of bugs that came about with this update. So, full credit where credit is due. They are trying to get on top of things. And, well, I think a lot of the issues with this DLC came about because of how Risk of Rain was created. Initially, when Risk of Rain 2 dropped, the game was entirely made by the guys at Hopoo Games, and everything felt, well, very logical. The devs had a solid game loop, and every update and eventual DLC added to this experience, this loop. Added survivors all felt fun and unique. Added items all felt like they served a purpose. No one knows Hopoo like Hopoo knows Hopoo. You know Hopoo? But Survivors of the Storm marked the first major update that was helmed by Gearbox after purchasing the Risk of Rain IP. Yeah, between Survivors of the Void and now, the developers sold the IP and wanted to focus on other projects. There were a lot of people angry at Hopoo for this when the news first dropped, insinuating they had sold out or how the Risk of Rain was just, doomed now. But honestly, if you put yourself in their shoes, these guys were students and essentially just got offered an insane amount of money to cement their future doing what they wanted to do. How could they really say no? But, understandably, everyone had their doubts about Gearbox really being able to handle this game and not, massively fuck it up. And the day the DLC dropped, yeah, it really looked like Gearbox really fucked it up. With a lot of the game's biggest content creators and players saying the DLC should just be fully rolled back, or some even saying the game was just dead now. I mean, the game's Steam review page went from overwhelmingly positive to overwhelmingly negative overnight. But, as I said, the game is in a lot better state now than it was a few short weeks ago. Like, the minute this DLC dropped, I had 3 runs just completely crash on me, and a 4th run resulting in me transcending the game's rules itself and becoming completely invulnerable. Sounds nice until you realize I also couldn't pick up items or activate the teleporter, which effectively just meant that the game hurled me into observer mode. If I'd been playing solo, this would have just meant I was locked out of the game. But, luckily, I was playing with another person who was able to survive and complete the run, while I spiritually watched over them from a higher reality. There are still a lot of mixed opinions on the latest DLC and Gearbox helming the game. But reviews on Steam have at least leveled out to mixed for now. And honestly, that still kind of bums me out a lot. Because while this latest DLC was, it was a bit of a misfire in some places. Probably should have been in the kitchen for a little longer cooking there, but the game itself is immensely replayable, incredibly fun, either with friends or playing alone, and has hundreds of hours of content to experience for under $30. It's a great game, and one of my favorite releases in the decade. I'd still highly recommend giving it a go. Just maybe put off Seekers of the Storm until they, iron out all the kinks or something. And for there to be a sale. It's still the same indie darling of a game. It's just got a little bit of Gearbox's grime on it now is all. Have you guys played a lot of Risk of Rain yourselves? Or its sequel, Risk of Rain 2? What are your favorite survivors or mods? Recently, I discovered this awesome mod which lets you play as Hunk from Resident Evil, and he feels incredibly fun and flashy to play. The modding scene for this game is seriously so awesome. And I think this is a good place to leave things. Thank you for everyone watching, and especially thank you to those of you who subscribed and left comments. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves.